It is officially time to go, so welcome guys, welcome. We are live from London, right in front of Buckingham Palace. So just a bit of housekeeping. As usual, you've got the chat, feel free to use it, ask me any questions you might have, and no worries, you are allowed to use the capital letters. And ask me any questions. If I've missed any of your questions, don't get offended, just try again, because I only see 2 or 3 comments on the screen. And for the ones that don't know me, I'm Nathalie, and I do quite a lot of those lives in London, especially dark history. So if you are into your dark history, you're in for a treat. Right, let's go. Before we go anywhere else, let me show you a lovely view here of the mall. So this avenue, the mall, it is meant to look like a red carpet. You know, the tarmac is red because it's going straight down towards the palace. And it's especially beautiful these days because we've got the flags, those big Union flags. They are only there for royal events, and they're still here from the coronation, and they will be here until the King's birthday or fake birthday, trooping the colors. So that's, I believe, on Saturday the 17th. It is a tradition. We celebrate the monarch's birthday in June because of the weather. Charles' birthday is in November, but because of the weather, we celebrate in June anyway. And right up there, this is Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, she's really the monarch that made Buckingham Palace what it is today. She's the one that really moved in and made it the official residence. About Queen Victoria, you might have heard when she was a child, she knew from a very young age, well, from the minute she was born really, that she was going to be queen one day. And they really wanted to make sure that absolutely nothing would happen to her. Hi, Lethargy. So sorry, kids trying to get on camera, that's why. So they really wanted to make sure nothing would happen to her, so they created what they called the Kensington system. So she was locked in at Kensington Palace. She was not allowed to go out at all. She could not even go downstairs alone. Someone had to grab her hand, and she was not allowed to go and play in the gardens. Mainly because they were actually worried that her uncle might try to murder her. We'll talk about her uncle in a little while, the Duke of Cumberland. But for now, let's take a look at the palace. So, Buckingham Palace, you might know it as the official residence. It's never really been a favorite, really, of the royals. And the king is not here, I can tell from the flag. When the flag is the Union flag, the monarch is not there. I know it's a bit confusing. You might have heard when the flag is up, the monarch is there. When the flag is not up, the monarch is not there. Yes, until 97 it was that straightforward. But it was not that flag though. It was not the Union flag, it was the royal standard. So that's the flag of the monarch. So until 97, when the Queen was there, the royal standard was up. The royal standard, if you don't know what it looks like, if you've seen the funerals on television, the standard was on the coffin. So if the monarch was there, the standard would be flying. What happened is, when Lady Diana passed away in 97, her body was here for a while. Tons and tons of flowers were deposited by the palace. And thousands of people came to pay their last respect, and they could not understand why there was no flag. They expected a flag flying at half-mast, and they couldn't understand why there was none. They were really disappointed, actually, and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, at the time, had to tell the Queen, Your Majesty, we've got to do something here. You are going to lose popularity here if we don't do anything. So they've decided to put the Union flag instead of the royal standard for Lady Diana. So now we kept the system in place. So now there's always a flag, but depending on which flag, you know whether the monarch is there or not. But now it's even more complicated because Charles doesn't live here. He lives in Clarence House. That's where we're heading to next. So now they actually put the flag on both buildings. Anyway, We're not here to, oh, you've not missed anything, Meg. We've literally just started. And I've not told you any dark history quite yet. Today I want to tell you stuff that you might not know, because I'm sure you already know quite a lot about the royal palaces. Today I want to tell you the dark stories behind those beautiful gates. And Buckingham Palace itself, it has a couple of ghosts. The first one is the ghost of a monk. He appears every Christmas Day apparently, although there's not been any sightings for a few decades now. He's described as wearing a brown frock, really, monk outfit, and he's in chains. We don't know why for sure, but there used to be a monastery around here. You know, there was a leprosy hospital that was first staffed by monks, and later on it was nuns. So the monk might have died in a cell. You know, the church, they used to have those, well, they had their own justice system, didn't they? You know, they had the ecclesiastic court. So sometimes they kind of made justice themselves without involving the justice of the men. So there could have been a monk that died around here. We don't really know. While we're here, you can actually see the difference in the stone between the sorry, let me try to pop it. There we go. Between the white building, so that's newer. The yellow part of the building straight ahead, that is Buckingham House. That's the original building of Buckingham Palace. It used to belong to the Duke of Buckingham, and George III, he had 15 children, and they started to feel a bit tight into St. James's Palace. So they decided to ask the Duke of Buckingham if they would sell their property. Well, when the king asks you something, he kind of tells you, doesn't he? So he kind of forced the Duke to sell his property, but he never really moved in. And that's how you can see the white stone and the yellow stone here, very different construction. Anyway, so that was for the first ghost. The second ghost is not actually a ghost, it's more like a ghostly noise. Again, it has not been heard in a few decades now, but apparently every so often in the palace, people have complained that they hear a gunshot. And that could, according to some, that could be a ghost. That goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. We had a chap that was the secretary of Edward VII. He was called Major John McGueen. And John was involved in a very public divorce. At the time, you know, it was very bad for your reputation, you know. People would kind of judge you. And he couldn't deal with it. And one day in Buckingham Palace, he took his own life. He shot himself in the head. So some say that it could be the ghost of John Gwynne that's actually haunting the palace today. Who knows, who knows. Anyway, another fact about Buckingham Palace that is very little known, Buckingham Palace might have been built on the site of a gay brothel. Yes, you've heard this right. On the site of a gay brothel, or at least a gay cruising site. Evidence are quite rare, you know, it's hard to find evidence of this type of stuff, but there's an LGBTQ plus historian, his name is Norton Richter. He is convinced that it is the case. He believed that the site of Mulberry Garden, just underneath the palace really, was where gay men used to find each other at the time in the 17th century. You've heard this too, Meg, yeah. It's hard to, because the thing is at the time there was no term for gay. They would usually take the name of a term that was a bit naughty for ladies, apologies for the term, but that's what they would say. They would use whore or trumpets, and they would put he in front of it. So they would say he whore or his trumpets. And we know for a fact that St. James's Park, just there on the other side, at the time of Charles II, for example, at night it was a bit of a red light district, really. If you wanted to read a very dirty poem, there's a poem from the John Wilmot, the Earl of Rochester. He was the Duke, actually. I think he was the Duke of Rochester. He wrote a poem called A Ramble Through St. James's Park. It is the dirtiest poem I've ever read. From the 17th century, and they used the B word, the F word. I was like, ooh, I never knew they even used them in those days. But yeah, so that's for St. James's Park, and apparently the area of Mulberry Garden, where the palace was built, was potentially the area for gay men. So the royal queens were probably not the first queens to frequent the site. That's okay, I'm allowed to do gay jokes. You're allowed to laugh because I'm gay myself. So that's fine, don't worry. So yeah, who knows? Anyway, about St. James's Park, there's a ghost as well, would you believe? We've got ghosts everywhere in London. There's a ghost of, the ghost of a lady with, well, a headless lady really, that has been seen quite a few times. And there's a lot of rumors that she might have been a murder victim, that her husband, a Queen's Guard, might have killed her and drowned her in the lake in the middle. There's no evidence of any of that, I'm afraid. It is possible, but there's no evidence of that. But what we do know is that there's quite a few people that have complained about a ghost around the area of St. James's Park. And in the 80s, there was a motorcyclist on the road on the other side of the park, Birdcage Walk. He went straight into a pillar. So he was gonna go down for careless driving, and apparently his lawyer brought up the story of the ghost. He said he's seen the headless lady, he was trying to avoid her, and that's why he went straight into a pillar. And apparently that worked with the magistrate. He was acquitted, would you believe? So sometimes ghosts can come a bit handy. Anyway, let's go and take a look at Clarence House. So Clarence House, that is where King Charles and Camilla live. They're not here today. It's not surprising. On a Friday, they're often in Highgrove, in the countryside. Charles is a very green man, he doesn't really like to be in the city when he doesn't have to. They were here on Wednesday. I've actually seen Charles on Wednesday, and he gave us a little wave. That was brilliant. Not that I care, I've seen him quite often, but because then I get very good reviews. Usually Camilla often waves. I love Camilla because I suppose she cares about her PR a little bit more because she's not been the most popular lady, so she does wave pretty much all the time. But to get a wave from Charles, that's awesome, yeah. I actually love it that they live in Clarence House, because I'm often here doing the changing of the guards, and on a Wednesday the King has to go into Buckingham Palace to meet the Prime Minister. Well, it doesn't have to be at the palace, but most of the time it is. And he's got to go back and forth anyway between home and the palace. So that's quite cool, because on a Wednesday I often get to see them. That would never work in Jersey. What would never work in Jersey, Roxanne? Oh, the court, well, it was in the 80s. I'm not sure it would work again nowadays, yeah. Anyway, there we are. So that is Clarence House right here. I'm gonna mute you for a sec. Apologies, I had to mute you because you had those cyclists with very loud music, And YouTube hates, well, it doesn't, you know, it's very, very careful with copyright. So I could have a copyright claim from the artist of the music that is being played on the bicycle. So if that happens again in any of my live, if I mute you, it's probably because there's music in the background. So don't get worried, the sound will come back a minute later. Anyway, the white building, that is Clarence House. So that's where King Charles and Camilla live. Since 2002, they moved in when the Queen Mother passed away. The Queen Mother used to live here, and the building next to it, that is Lancaster House, the yellow building. And I'm pretty sure most of you have seen the inside of Lancaster House before. It belongs to government, and the corridors look very similar to Buckingham Palace. If you've seen The Crown or A King's Speech or the new Bridgerton about Queen Charlotte, it's actually filmed in there. Because they do not like Netflix crews in the palace, what they do is they rent a few paintings and they film in the yellow building there. You might recognize the stone. It's the same stone as the back of the palace, Buckingham House. This is the Bath stone from the city of Bath. Anyway, Clarence House, guess what? It's got a ghost as well. The ghost story here happened in the, well, it really came out in the, through World War II. Through World War II, the building of Clarence House was actually given to the Red Cross, the Red Cross, the part that dealt with the prisoner of war. And there was a young clerk, Sonia Mash. She worked in there, and she had to work on a Saturday afternoon. She was the only one there, and she felt terrible. She felt like she was being watched, and she had this horrible feeling, but she couldn't go because, you know, she had to work, and eventually she really felt like something was behind her. She turned around and she saw a grey triangular shape coming straight towards her. She grabbed her jacket and ran. She ran home. And apparently, when she came back to work on a Monday, she told her colleagues what had happened. And one of her colleagues was like, "Oh, don't worry, that's the ghost. That's the Duke of Connaught." We do not know why the Duke of Connaught would be haunting the building. He used to live there. The Duke of Connaught was the last surviving son of Queen Victoria. He died in 1942, I think, at the age of 91. So no violent death or anything, so we don't really know why he was hunting the building. But what we know is that the colleague definitely had heard of the ghost before, because straight away it was like, that's the Duke of Connaught. His sister Louise, she also lived quite late. I think she was 91 as well. Louise, she's my favorite of Queen Victoria's children, because she was a feminist. She was a suffragist. I might have told you the difference between the suffragist and the suffragettes in my suffragettes tour. If you've not seen it, it's in my videos. You can actually see the replay. But she was a big suffragist and feminist, and we know that Queen Victoria was not. Queen Victoria was absolutely not a feminist. So that's interesting. She went against her mother. Oh, thank you, Tish. Yeah. And let's go towards St. James's Palace. So we've got two royal palaces here right next one another. St. James's Palace, it's the original one, and it is the official residence as much as Buckingham Palace, really. And well, if not more, you know, when the Queen passed away, it is here at St. James's Palace that they had the accession committee the next day, not at Buckingham Palace. And we do not have any major royals living in St. James's today. Princess Anne, when she's in London, she sleeps at St. James's Palace, but it is not her main residence. You thought Queen Victoria would have been a feminist from her character. Well, actually, no. It's interesting because she was a woman in power. So you'd think, she'd but no. She really did not want to help the cause. She believed that, women had their place in society, interesting. It's interesting that a woman in such a high position would have this type of views, but yeah. Anyway, St. James's Palace, it's actually a Tudor building. It was built by Henry VIII for his second wife, Anne Boleyn. You might know the story of Henry and his 6 wives. Henry was first married to a Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon, but she failed to give him a boy. At the time, boys were much more important for the future of the dynasty, really. And so she gave him a daughter, Mary, that became Bloody Mary. You might have, if you've had the cocktail, that's after the monarch. Well, also that's actually debatable. Some say that Bloody Mary was actually created in Paris and it had nothing to do with Bloody Mary. But anyway, so she had a daughter, but Henry wanted a boy. So because she was a bit older than him, he wanted a new wife. He had a lot of mistresses, but he wanted a wife to have a legitimate boy, not a bastard, as they would have said at the time. And at the time, the only person that could grant you a divorce or an annulment, really, was the Pope. So Henry asked the Pope. The Pope said no. So Henry broke up with the Pope to create the Church of England, to grant himself the title of the head of the church. Then he was able to grant himself a divorce. Still today, the king is the head of the church. King Charles III is very much a great defender of all faith. And if you've watched the coronation, you might have seen representatives of other faiths, which was great. But he is still the head of the Church of England. So anyway, Henry split it up with the church, the Catholic Church, to be able to get the top job in terms of religion, and to be able to grant himself a divorce and then marry his favorite mistress, Anne Boleyn. And for Anne, he built this lovely palace, St. James's Palace. Unfortunately for Anne, she never saw the palace finished because he chopped her head off. With Anne, it's that the problem is that she also failed to give him a boy. She gave him a daughter, Elizabeth, that became Elizabeth I, great monarch, but no boys. And he decided that he had to change wife again. He accused her of treason. Yeah, poor Anne. He accused her of cheating on him with 5 guys, including her own brother. Now, I know it sounds a bit far-fetched, but it is actually possible. Anne was so desperate for her boy, it is possible that she might have asked her brother to help her get pregnant. Who knows? We will never know. And on top of that, she had a boy that was stillborn. The baby was dead and he was disabled. I know it's really sad, but at the time, sadly, they associated disability with witchcraft. So not only did he accuse her of cheating on him, but he also accused her of being a witch. So that's how she got a bit shortened, and she never saw her palace finished. But it became the official residence when the Whitehall Palace burned down. Whitehall was on the other side of the park. And today we have, we used to have the princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. They used to live there until 2017. But they had to pay a rent because they're not what we call working royals. They have their own jobs and their own income, so it's not ourselves, it's not the taxpayer that paid for the princesses. So they had to pay a rent that was 1,600 a month for a 4-bedroom flat in St. James's area. It's really not much. And actually that was quite funny. In 2017, their dad, Andrew, decided to stop paying. So it was all over the tabloids that the princesses were homelesses in London. I think they're fine. I think they're okay. Yes, exactly. 3 of our great monarchs were women. Who's the third one? Are you counting Anne? I like Queen Anne. Yeah. And yeah, exactly, Tristy. Anyway, let me show you here. We've got some little boot scraper. So if you came down from your horse into the muddy streets of London before to get into the palace, you could just clean your shoes. And let me show you the entrance. So we've got 2 new residents in St. James's Palace. You might have seen it in the tabloids a couple of months ago. Apparently, Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas are now renting a flat here at St. James's Palace. Apparently, since 2015, you can do that. If you have money, I don't know how much, they've not published how much they pay, and I suppose a very good security check, it is possible. Right, and let me show you, if I came here uninvited, they could shoot me from here, those little loopholes with an arrow or maybe a musket or anything. And if you've missed, if you cannot hit me from here, fear not, there's another one right up there on the other side. There we go. Anyway, we have a little bit of a murder mystery here at the palace, and very probably a ghost as well. The murder mystery happened here in 1810. It was the Duke of Cumberland, Ernest Augustus. Let me show you his photo. I think I've got his photo. He was the son of George III, one of the many sons. That's Ernest Augustus. And he was the uncle of Queen Victoria. Now, the Duke of Cumberland, he had a terrible reputation. He was, he often got a bad press. In his defense, he looked a bit like a villain. He had been injured on his face fighting the French, and he had a scarf on his face, so he looked a bit like a villain. And he was, he had been accused of sleeping with his sister, his little sister Sophia. That's probably all rubbish, but she did have a pregnancy, illegitimate. And one night, he was here at the palace. He had gone for dinner at Greenwich, and he came back here into his bed. He had 2 valets, one called Joseph Sellis and one called Cornelius Neil. Joseph Sellis had a mixed reputation. He was from Sardinia, so Italian, Catholic. He was said to hate royalty, yet he took a job for the Duke. He had just come back from New York, where he was working as a servant for a Mr. Church, and he had been accused of stealing from his employer. It was never proven, but yeah, he had a bad rep. And one night, the Duke is in his bed, sleeping, about 2 a.m., when he's being woken up by a blow on his head, like a baseball bat, or maybe the flat side of an axe. So the Duke stands up, he faces his attacker. The attacker cut a bit of his thigh, he cut a bit of his leg, not very deep. Then the attacker runs away. The Duke opens the door and he screams, "Neil, Neil, I am murdered!" So Neil the valet ran to assist the Duke, of course. And because there was an attacker in the building, they decided to run to find the other valet, Joseph Sellis, to let him know about the attacker. So they ran to Sellis's bedroom. The bedroom was locked. So they were like, "Sellis, Sellis!" The bedroom was locked. They couldn't get in. So they went around. There was a second door. When they managed to open the door, they found that Sellis had been brutally attacked. He was on his bed in a pool of blood. His throat had been cut very, very deep, nearly till the vertebra. And he did not have any blood on his hand, and a pair of slippers had been found, his slippers, into the Duke's bedroom. Now, there was an inquest. The inquest concluded that Celis had tried to kill the Duke, and because he did not manage, he ran to his own bedroom where he killed himself. Now, it is possible, but to cut your throat nearly to the vertebra, it's actually quite hard. When you look at the extent of the injuries, it does look like it could have been the Duke that killed his valet and then run to his bedroom to fake an attack on himself. Who knows? There were a lot of journalists at the time that did accuse the Duke, but they were sued for libel and they had to go to prison. There were a lot of gossip that maybe the Duke was actually having an affair with the other valet, Neil, and Celis had was a bit too surprised to find them in a very sexual position. Who knows? Or there were also some rumors that the Duke might have been having an affair with Celis's wife. She had a kid and he was the godfather, so it could be because it was his kid. Who knows? We will never know. What we do know is that he ended up being the King of Hanover, the Duke of Cumberland, because he was next in line after Queen Victoria in the UK. That's why they were worried that he might try to kill the little Victoria. Although she was not Victoria yet, she was called Alexandrine. The royals, they choose their name. Victoria was actually her second name. And because in the UK, a lady could be a queen if she was next in line, In Hanover, in Germany, that was not the case. So he ended up being King of Hanover. And he was actually a very popular king. The little detail that makes me think, I think it might be him, it's that 20 years later, he had another servant called Lord Thomas North Graves. And he died in the very same circumstances. On his bed, his throat cut very, very deep, almost to the vertebra. And they again concluded it was a suicide. Now, it is possible, but twice the same MO, Or it is also possible that Graves really killed himself, but he wanted to blame the Duke, so he might have cut his own throat exactly the same as the first valet. Who knows? Well, Trish, apparently it is possible. It's hard, but apparently some have managed. For example, we talked about Annie Chapman. Her dad, that's how he killed himself, sadly. Her dad was a Queen's Guard, and he did cut his own throat on a bed. So it's hard, but it is doable, apparently. Anyway, we are now here in front of Queen Mary of Tech. So you see, she doesn't have a number because she was not a queen in her own right. She was a queen because she married a king. She married George V. So she was the grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Mary, there's a little monument for her here because she used to live in the building behind it. She lived in Marlborough House after the death of her husband. And that's exactly what I want to tell you about now, the death of her husband. George V, well, let me tell you a bit more about his life before to tell you about his death. I believe he was murdered. I'm gonna explain myself because you might not call it murder. I would. George V he was actually a very good king. He was not meant to be king. He had an older brother, so he was the spare. His brother was Prince Victor Albert. You might have heard of him if you followed my Jack the Ripper tour. If you've not seen that tour, it's in my videos. Victor Albert was a bit of a naughty boy. He was known to, they said he had an affair with a prostitute in Whitechapel and that led to the royal conspiracy. That's probably all rubbish, but he was indeed quite naughty. and he had actually he had been caught in going to a gay brothel, the Cleveland Street scandal, and he claimed that he did not know he was going into a gay brothel. No. He thought he was going for a pose plastic. He had got a flyer for a pose plastic. A pose plastic, it's actually a very interesting type of show. If you, at the time in the 19th century, striptease was not allowed. You were not allowed to have naked ladies on stage. Well, not dancing naked ladies, but you could have naked ladies if they were not moving. So a pose plastic was like a tableau. They'll close the curtain, naked ladies would take a position, they'll open the curtain, and then you had a new naked tableau. So interesting show. So that's what Prince Eddie claimed when he got, Victor Albert, his name is Eddie. Again, they choose their name, it's very confusing. So that's what he claimed when he got arrested. And he actually died quite young, so in an influenza epidemic. And that's how his little brother took the big job. He was actually fiancé to Mary of Teck. So Mary, when she lost her fiancé, she was like, okay, I'll take George instead. So that's how she ended up marrying George V. And George V was a very good king. A very quiet man, a very domestic man. Let me show you his photo with a little girl that you might have heard of. Her name was Lilibeth. He's actually Grandpa England. She called him Grandpa England, and he called her Lilibeth. He's the one that came up with the name. He's often been described as a very dull man. I don't think George V was dull, but he was indeed a bit of a contrast with his dad, Edward VII, that was a very flamboyant king. And he was also a contrast with his brother, that was, of course, a very naughty. To give you an idea, Victor Albert, he was known to be very well equipped, if you know what I mean. You might have heard of the piercing, the Prince Albert. Some say that it came, if you don't know, that's a piercing on your penis. Some say that it came from Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, but no, actually it came from Victor Albert, his grandson. Well, that's what we believe, at least. We don't know for sure, but yeah. So yeah, George was a big contrast with his dad, with his brother. He was indeed a quiet man, a family man. But that's exactly what the monarchy needed at the time, because at the beginning of the century, all the monarchies in Europe were crumbling, really. Well, at least in Russia and then in Hanover. So that's exactly what we needed just before the First World War. And he's also the king that changed the name of the royal family, you know. They used to be called Saxo-Coburg-Gotha, which sounded a little bit too German before the First World War. And he changed it to Windsor, the name of their favorite palace. Today, if we were going to change the name of the royal family, you'd have endless committees and discussion. But at the time, they just went like, yeah, Windsor, that's it. And actually, his cousin, William II, the German Kaiser, he made a joke. He said, okay, I guess then soon we'll talk about the merry wives of Saxo-Coburg-Gotha. So yeah, he changed the name of the family. He was a very quiet man. He was very good through the First World War. You know, there was no alcohol at the palace. We had restrictions and stuff. But his death was a little bit out of the ordinary. Before to tell you about his death, let me just show you down here. So we've got the Queen Mother and the Queen's father there. So that is George VI. So it is his dad that we're talking about at the moment. You might be able to read, it says Queen Elizabeth, but remember, she doesn't have a number. So she's not Queen Elizabeth II, that's the Queen Mother. When a lady marries a king, she does become a queen consort, but she'd never get a number. So if Camilla was to die, we might have a statue of Queen Camilla in 50 years, or maybe less than that. But it would never say Queen Camilla I. because she's not a queen in her own right. She's a queen because she married a king. Anyway, back to George V. George V was a heavy smoker, especially after the war. And he caught bronchitis. All this generation of those kings, they all died of smoking-related illnesses, and well, Michaela, yes, you're right. Actually, well, if they were to walk, technically she shouldn't be in front of him, but I suppose because they are statues, it doesn't count. Hi, Sarah. And so yeah, he was very unwell. He had been unwell many times, and he had a doctor, a physician, a royal physician called Bertrand, Lord Dawson of Penn. Let me show you a photo of Bertrand. I've got his photo. Lord Dawson of Penn was, well, as a doctor, the king actually liked him because he was very straightforward. You know, if you were unwell, he would tell you what you've got. He wasn't going to try to be polite and just go around the subject. He would literally tell you. And one night in 1936, he was alone with the king on Nurse Black. The king was very unwell. To be fair, the king was probably gonna die. But Bertrand had already told the press that the king was on his last leg. So now the king had to die because the man was a man of reputation. You know, if he said the king was dying and he didn't die, that'll be a bit embarrassing. And at 11 p.m., he called his wife to tell her to call the Times newspaper, to tell them to wait until midnight for the death of the king. Now, the official story of the death of George V, what we believed to be true until 1986, when the diaries of the doctor came out, it's that the king was very unwell. His private secretary came to visit, and the king said, "How is the empire, sir?" And the private secretary said, "Very well, sir, very well. You're well as well. Soon you'll be able to go and recover in Bognor." Bognor Regis it's a town in the south of England where you go to recover often. And the king famously said, "Oh, bugger, Bognor." And that's meant to be his last words. We know for a fact now that this is not true. Because in 1986, they found the diaries of the infamous doctor, Lord Dawson of Penn. And by his own admission, Dawson had basically killed the king. He told his wife to call the Times newspaper. Then he prepared 2 injections, 1 lethal dose of morphine and 1 lethal dose of cocaine. He gave the injection to Nurse Catherine Black. Nurse Black was very well aware of the consequences, so she refused to do it. So the doctor grabbed the syringe and he injected it in the jugular vein of the king. The king just looked at the doctor and he said, "God damn you." So that's actually his last words. Then a few minutes later, the king was dead, and that was in the morning newspaper. The Times newspaper had a better reputation than the afternoon publications. Now, little pause in the story. That's the way you'd like to go. Well, yeah, I mean, some people might call it euthanasia. I would argue that it's not euthanasia because the king was not aware and he was not suffering. He was very unwell, but not suffering. So this is the Grand Old Duke of York. He was the second son of the King George III. You might have heard of him in the little nursery rhyme. Oh, the Grand Old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men. He marched them to the top of the hill and marched them down again. I have no reason, but that's probably why you know the Duke. Anyway, back to George V. To be fair, the king might have died anyway, but he had recovered twice. In 1926, he was really unwell. Everyone believed the king was dying, and he recovered. So, you know, it was possible. It would have been very embarrassing for Dawson of Penn because, you know, he was a very, he was a doctor for high society, and that would have been bad for his reputation if he said the king was going to die, and then he did not. Officially, in his diary, Dawson of Penn gave two explanations. He said it was because he wanted the death of the king to be in the morning newspaper, in the Times. And he also said it's because members of the royal family told him to not unnecessarily prolong the life of the king. So that would have to be Queen Mary or his son, his heir, Edward VIII, or the future Edward VIII. But yeah, when those diaries were found, Dawson of Penn was long dead. And Nurse Black, she had never mentioned the story. Even when she wrote her memoirs, she never mentioned it. So yeah, officially, I'm sorry, that's what I call regicide. So, you know, if that is clearly a murder, and this is a fact, that we know for sure. I'm about to tell you a bit of speculations. When you know that you have a physician, a royal doctor that likes to play God, then you can put into consideration a few other deaths that occurred in the royal family at the time. A year before George V, his sister, Princess Victoria, she was also treated by Lord Dawson of Penn. She had an injection and she passed. On time for the morning newspaper as well. A year and a half later, his sister as well, Maud, she was Queen of Denmark, of Norway. Maud came to visit London. She was in perfect health when she came down to London. Then she caught, we don't even know what she caught. She felt very unwell. She had an operation by Lord Dawson of Penn that seemed to go right. And then a few days later, she was unwell, she had an injection and she passed. Now, Dawson of Penn actually wrote to Norway saying, oh, that's good, she died on time for the morning newspaper. So, you know, if Dawson of Penn was indeed a serial killer, you know, if you happen to be a serial killer, that's probably the most exciting thing, to kill a king. So he had now killed a king, a queen, and a princess royal. You know, who knows? I'm not telling you this is a fact. This is very much, you know, debatable. The next one is a bit far-fetched, but you might remember George V. He had a child that was very much hidden away, Prince John. He suffered from epilepsy, and we now think he also suffered from. Let me show you the Admiralty Arch here. We also believe now that he also suffered from quite severe autism. And very sadly, he was hidden away in Sandringham. At the time, it was quite common for families with disabled children to kind of hide them away. Especially the royal family, you know, because people believed the royals, they had blue blood, you know. And sadly, the boy was hidden and he died at the age of 13. Officially, it was an epileptic fit in the middle of the night in Sandringham, which is very possible. I mean, you can die of epilepsy. It is rare, but it can happen. Well, Dawson of Penn was already the royal physician at the time. Could he have anything to do with it? You know, maybe. We don't know. We will never know. But it is a possibility. Tomorrow, actually, we'll talk about another doctor that liked to play God. Anyway, people at yes, exactly, The Lost Prince. I've seen the movie. It's quite good, and I think the way George V is portrayed, it's probably quite accurate. I think, or at least from what I've read. George V was the only monarch that had a tattoo. He had a dragon tattoo on his arm that he had done in Japan with his brother Prince Eddie. And it is a horrible story. It's quite a sad movie, but yeah, interesting. And anyway, Lord Dawson of Penn, people knew at the time. The other royal physicians, they were well aware that the Penn was a bit dodgy. There was actually a little rhyme that went at the time. It said, Lord Dawson of Penn killed many men, that's why we sing God Save the King. So people knew very much that, you know, something was up with the doctor. We don't know who wrote the rhyme, but probably the other physicians. Dragon tattoo, yeah. Yeah. It's like the girl with the dragon tattoo, but it's the king with the dragon tattoo. Yeah. He spent quite a few years trying to hide it after that, but I suppose that's often the case with tattoos that you have done when you are young. Anyway, we are now on Trafalgar Square, so it's officially the center of London. If you went to Nottingham and you saw a sign that said Nottingham 220 miles from London, it would be calculated from right here. Across the street, that's a bank there. They used to have a drive-through. That was the only bank with a drive-through. And let me show you the sign while we're here. That's two little men holding hands. So that was for Gay Pride in 2016. It was meant to last only for Pride. So we have two little men holding hands, little ladies. We have the lesbian sign, the gay sign. It was meant to be only for Pride, but we decided to keep it. So it's quite cool. And if you want to have a laugh, you want to go online and read all the complaints that have been sent to Westminster Council about those gay signs. Most of them are just purely homophobic, but some of them are hilarious. One of them, I'll show you the next one. It's the lesbian sign, so it's the two little ladies sign together. One of them, the chap wrote to the council, and he said, oh, let's try to get this one. Let's go. There we go. So that's the lesbian sign here. Oops. So yeah, one of the complaint, it said, oh, I came to Trafalgar Square, yeah, with my missus, my daughter, and my son, and I was waiting to cross the street, yeah, and my daughter and my missus, they crossed, and my son and I, we waited forever. The guy seriously believed that only ladies could cross. So some people don't think really. So yeah, if you want to have a laugh, just Google it, find those complaints. They are very funny. And let's cross over to go and take a look at King Charles I. And this one is the transgenders. I don't know if you can see very well. Let me see. Oh, it's gone now. So that's it's all around the square, really. So this is Charles I, and Charles I was beheaded 1649. That's part of the reason why until September we didn't really know for sure whether our Charles was gonna choose to be called Charles III, because Charles I, we chopped his head off 1649. Charles II, he was in exile in France for about 10 years when Oliver Cromwell was in power. And when he came back, he was a bit too French. He had taken a bit of the French fashion and the French arrogance. That's fine, I can say that because I'm French, so you are allowed to laugh. And he was not massively popular either. And because the royals, they actually choose their name, we believe that Charles could have changed his name. He could have been George, his second name is George, so he could have been King George VII, or he could have been Arthur. His third name is actually Arthur, so if he wanted, he could have been King Arthur I. So that would be quite a cool king name, because we don't know whether we really had a King Arthur. You might have heard of Arthur with Excalibur and Merlin. Historians are still debating today whether Arthur ever existed. Anyway, he's chosen to stick with Charles. Very good. Now, Charles I right here, he was beheaded, so why do we have a statue of him? That's actually quite interesting. The statue was meant to be melted when Charles was beheaded, and the guy that took it away, he actually hid the statue in his back garden. He told everyone it was melted, and he made a fortune by selling little statuettes pretending that they came from the melted bronze of Charles I's statue. So he made a fortune, and a few years later, when we brought the monarchy back up, he went to see the King Charles II, and he said, oh, by the way, I've got a statue of your dad. Would you like to buy it from me? And the king said yes. So he ended up making another fortune by selling the statue back to the king. So quite a good idea, really. And that's why we have him here. He's quite short. I don't know if you can see. He was a very short man. And before we go, a last little dark story, or legend, I would say, because we don't know if there's any truth behind it. This is the Admiral Nelson on the top of his column up there. Of course, you know him from the Battle of Trafalgar. When Nelson died, at the time, people that died at sea, they used to drop their bodies in the sea. They didn't really have the capacity to bring the bodies back because they didn't know how to preserve those bodies. And Nelson did not want to be buried at sea. He had told his men, if I die at sea, you bring my body back to London. And when he died, his men didn't know how to preserve his body, so they put him in a barrel of brandy. Well, a barrel, it's probably like a coffin, but with brandy that they had stolen from the French. Some people say it was rum, because rum is a bit more patriotic, but the official version of the story, it is brandy. And apparently when they got to London, they opened the coffin. The Admiral was well preserved, well pickled, but there was no more brandy. They said that the sailors had dug little hole to drink the brandy anyway. Who knows? It's probably not true or massively exaggerated, but who knows? We used to have an expression to tap the Admiral, that's to go for a drink or to go for a shot. I don't think anyone really uses it anymore, but yeah. Anyway, that's gonna be the end of the tour. Let me know if you have any questions for me before we go. Yeah, you can base, yeah. I'm Caroline, no worries for being late. You'd have to come back. And let me know if you have any questions. If not, thank you very much for coming today. It's amazing to have you on board. There's a Tapping the Admiral pub. Oh, I don't think I've been to the Tapping the Admiral, have I? No, I don't think. I should give it a visit. Thank you, Tish. Thank you, Beatrice. Thanks, everyone. If any of you left me a little tip as well. Again, I cannot really see them live on YouTube because they'll go into my email. Thank you, Martin. But if any of you did, or if you are about to do so, thank you very much. If it is on PayPal, I'm not able to say thank you individually, but make sure you know you are very much appreciated. And on Buy Me a Coffee, I can actually send you a little thank you. And thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, Pisas. Thanks, Kurt. And if you want to see a bit more of me, tomorrow I'm going to Eastbourne. I know it's an early one if you are on the other side of the pond. If you are asleep, don't worry, you'll be able to catch the replay anyway. And thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Marilyn. So we'll talk about some suspicious death on the seaside in Eastbourne. And I'm actually meeting one of the Hegohers as well in Eastbourne, so that should be quite cool. And the next week I'm not doing any tours because I'm away. I'm going to Helsinki, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And my friend doesn't want me to do any tours. I'm not allowed because when we last went on a holiday together in Wales last summer, I scheduled a tour. And then I don't know what happened that day. There was no signal anywhere. I went all over town. I was looking for signal, stressing everywhere. I ruined the first afternoon of the trip, and then I had to cancel the tour because there was no signal. I had never canceled the tour before. I just hate to cancel anything. And so my friend is now you're not running any days of the holiday. So I might do a few videos to put on YouTube later on, but I'm not doing any lives. Are you coming to Eastbourne later, Jill? Lovely. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Stephanie. Cool, I don't see any more questions, so I'm gonna get going. Have a great evening or a great morning, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow in Eastbourne. So in Eastbourne, I'm a tourist, you know. I'm not gonna know everything, but we've got some cool stories over there. So yeah. So hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow. If you were completely new to me, hope you give me a little subscribe. And if you've enjoyed that tour, make sure you give it a thumbs up as well if you can. That always helps with the algorithm, and that helps more people discovering the video. So if you don't mind, that'll be amazing. Right. Thank you very much. Have a good evening or a good morning, whatever time it is for you. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.